Dr. Rathod, Tagore's views on nationalism were notably different from other Indian freedom fighters. Could you explain his main critique of aggressive nationalism?
Certainly, Tagore believed nationalism, if unchecked, could lead to intolerance and violence, similar to what he observed in Europe during World War I. His focus was on promoting humanism and universal brotherhood over divisive nationalist fervor.
While Tagore warned against nationalism's potential for division, other leaders like Tilak saw it as crucial for uniting Indians against British rule. How did Tagore's approach differ in terms of action?
Leaders like Tilak rallied Indians with slogans like "Swaraj is my birthright." In contrast, Tagore urged intellectual and cultural growth, fearing that nationalism could spiral into unnecessary conflict, as seen in the Western model.
Given these divergent views, how do you think Tagore's stance impacted the freedom movement?
Though less focused on direct political action, Tagore's emphasis on education and cultural exchange laid groundwork for a broader understanding of freedom, advocating a future where global unity triumphs over national divides.
Moving on to Tagore's preference for peace, he seemed to prioritize intellectual freedom over political struggle. How did this shape his vision for India's future?
Tagore envisioned a nation where freedom extended beyond political independence, advocating for spiritual and intellectual liberation. He opposed aggressive movements, promoting self-improvement and cultural growth instead.
Yet, leaders like Bose found armed struggle necessary, even forming the INA. Was Tagore's approach seen as impractical during the struggle?
Some viewed his methods as idealistic, yet Tagore's peace-focused perspective offered a counter-narrative. It emphasized sustainable freedom through education, which he believed was more enduring than political victories.
Given today's global context, how does Tagore's vision resonate with current peace-building efforts?
His ideas parallel modern peace initiatives, stressing dialogue and cultural exchange over conflict. In a world facing ideological divides, Tagore's vision encourages bridging gaps through mutual understanding.
Tagore's universal outlook contrasted sharply with the national focus of other leaders. Can you shed light on how he balanced globalism with his desire for Indian independence?
Tagore championed Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or the world is one family. He desired an independent India that was also globally connected, viewing nationalism as a barrier to universal human unity.
On the other hand, Nehru and others prioritized nation-building post-independence. Did this conflict with Tagore's ideals?
Indeed, while Nehru focused on self-reliance, Tagore feared that an insular approach would limit growth. He believed that integrating global ideas could enrich national identity rather than dilute it.
How might Tagore's universalism influence contemporary global relations?
In today's interconnected world, his vision encourages embracing diversity and fostering international collaboration, essential for addressing global challenges like climate change and economic inequality.
Lastly, let's delve into Tagore's educational philosophy. How did his founding of Shantiniketan reflect his broader ideals on freedom and cultural growth?
Tagore believed education was key to true freedom, fostering creativity and critical thinking beyond nationalistic confines. Shantiniketan became a beacon for this vision, integrating world cultures into its curriculum.
Contrasting this, other leaders prioritized political independence over education. Was Tagore's approach seen as too passive during the independence struggle?
Some may have perceived it that way, but Tagore's emphasis on intellectual liberation provided a foundation for post-colonial identity, advocating cultural resilience over mere political sovereignty.
In what ways do you think Tagore's educational initiatives continue to influence India's cultural and intellectual landscape?
His legacy persists in fostering an environment where education encourages global citizenship and cultural appreciation, essential for nurturing informed and empathetic
Tagore's
future
essay,
leaders.
Nationalism in India, highlights a distinct divergence between India's spiritual unity and Western political nationalism. Dr. Rathod, could you elaborate on how Tagore perceives these differences?
Certainly, Tagore argues that while Western nations grew through conquest and power, India's civilization thrived on spiritual and cultural inclusiveness. He believed adopting Western-style nationalism would erode India's true identity, akin to diluting a unique essence with a foreign substance.
That's insightful. However, some might argue that Western nationalism brought about unity and strength. How does Tagore counter this viewpoint?
Tagore warns that this type of nationalism fosters competition and division rather than harmony. An anecdote he uses is the peaceful assimilation of different cultures in India, unlike the conflicts seen in Europe. He insists that India's strength lies in its unity, not in imitating the West.
In a forward-looking sense, how does Tagore envision India's path?
He envisions a path where India maintains its spiritual and cultural identity, promoting peace and unity over aggression. Tagore's foresight suggests India can lead globally by example, emphasizing interconnectedness rather than isolation.
Tagore was particularly wary of extreme nationalism, seeing it as a precursor to violence and division. Dr. Rathod, what are the key dangers he identified?
Tagore observed that extreme nationalism often devolves into hatred for other nations, leading to conflicts like World War I. He cautioned against nationalism that rejects global cooperation, suggesting it could fracture India's social fabric, much like a brittle piece of clay.
Some might argue that nationalism fosters a strong identity and pride. How does Tagore's perspective challenge this?
He counters that nationalism should unite rather than divide. For example, Tagore witnessed how strong nationalism in Europe led to imperialism which oppressed weaker nations. He believed that India's nationalism should be rooted in moral values and unity.
Looking to the future, what does Tagore suggest for India to avoid such pitfalls?
Tagore advises fostering a sense of global responsibility and cooperation, rather than isolationism. He envisions India as a beacon of peace, advocating for a form of nationalism that respects diversity and promotes global harmony.
Education plays a pivotal role in Tagore's vision for India's future. Dr. Rathod, how does he view the educational system's impact on nation building?
Tagore criticized the British education system for creating obedient workers instead of free thinkers. He founded Shantiniketon to encourage creativity and critical thinking, believing that a nation's progress hinges on educated, self-reliant citizens.
Some might argue that a structured education system ensures discipline and order. How does Tagore respond to such a perspective?
Tagore would argue that discipline without freedom stifles innovation. He likened rigid education to a caged bird unable to soar. Instead, he advocated for a system blending Indian culture with modern knowledge, fostering global awareness.
In terms of future implications, what does Tagore envision for India's educational landscape?
He foresaw an education system nurturing independent thought and cultural pride, essential for building a strong nation. Tagore's vision implies that educated citizens are the true architects of a nation's destiny, shaping a future of peace and progress.
Tagore's take on nationalism extends beyond borders, advocating for universalism. Dr. Rathod, how does he reconcile nationalism with global responsibilities?
Tagore believed that nationalism should not overshadow our duty to humanity. He saw a country's greatness not in military might, but in its contribution to global harmony, akin to a thread in a vast tapestry of nations working together.
Critics might say that prioritizing globalism could weaken national identity. What is Tagore's counterargument?
Tagore would argue that true strength comes from embracing diversity and fostering international cooperation. He warned against isolationism, which he saw as a barrier to progress, much like a wall blocking sunlight.
Looking ahead, how does Tagore's vision guide India's place in the world?
He envisions India leading by example, promoting peace and unity while respecting cultural diversity. Tagore's foresight suggests that India's path involves balancing national pride with global responsibility, ensuring a harmonious
Rabindranath Tagore's essay, Nationalism in India, presents a compelling argument that true freedom is not merely political independence. What did he propose as the foundation of a truly free society?
Tagore believed that India's real freedom lay in achieving social equality and comprehensive education. He argued that without addressing these issues, mere political freedom would be hollow, akin to having a body without a soul.
Indeed, his critique of blind nationalism is quite profound. Tagore criticized the caste system and economic disparity, suggesting that these were the true barriers to progress. How did he envision overcoming these challenges?
Tagore advocated for dismantling the rigid caste hierarchies and bridging economic divides. He emphasized equal opportunities for all, warning that focusing solely on nationalism could lead to societal fragmentation and injustice.
That's a valid point. However, some may argue that nationalism can unify people against a common enemy. What was Tagore's counterargument to this notion?
He cautioned that nationalism based solely on opposition to foreign rule could perpetuate internal divisions. For Tagore, a just society unified by social equality and education was the true essence of nationalism, essential for lasting unity.
Turning to education, Tagore was critical of the British system prevalent in India. What were his main concerns with this educational approach?
Tagore criticized it for stifling creativity and promoting rote learning. He observed that it produced clerks and bureaucrats rather than independent thinkers, which he saw as a major impediment to India's intellectual and cultural growth.
He famously stated that education should awaken the mind and soul. How did Tagore propose to reform the educational system to achieve this goal?
He envisioned an education that fostered creativity, critical thinking, and self-reliance. Tagore advocated for a curriculum rooted in Indian culture yet open to global knowledge, emphasizing a holistic development approach.
Critics might argue that a traditional education prepares students for practical roles in society. How did Tagore address this concern without losing touch with modernity?
Tagore's alternative was to create thinkers who could innovate and adapt, not just serve. His educational model aimed to balance traditional values with modern skills, preparing individuals for a rapidly changing world.
To put his educational philosophy into action, Tagore established Shantiniketan. What was the core idea behind this experimental school?
Shantiniketan was designed as a place of learning in harmony with nature, where students could explore creativity through music, art, and literature alongside traditional subjects. It was a radical shift from conventional schooling methods.
How did Shantiniketan differ from the British-style schools in terms of teaching methods and philosophy?
Unlike the British system focused on obedience and memorization, Shantiniketan encouraged questioning, self-expression, and social responsibility. It sought to develop well-rounded individuals who could contribute meaningfully to society.
Some might argue that such an approach might not prepare students for the real world. What's your take on how Tagore justified this educational model?
Tagore believed that nurturing free, creative minds would not only enrich individuals but also society as a whole. His model was about creating leaders and innovators, not just workers, a vision still relevant in today's globalized context.
Even today, Tagore's insights on nationalism, social equality, and education seem incredibly pertinent. In what ways do you think his ideas resonate with contemporary India?
Tagore's emphasis on social equality is crucial as caste and religious divisions still persist. His vision of education reform to encourage creativity over rote learning is increasingly relevant in a world that values innovation and critical thinking.
His advocacy for women's empowerment and economic justice remains a pressing issue. How do you see these aspects evolving in modern Indian society?
Women's rights and economic equity are gaining traction, echoing Tagore's call for a balanced society. However, challenges remain, and his vision of an inclusive and just society is a goal we are still striving to achieve.
Given these enduring challenges, how do you envision Tagore's ideas shaping India's future?
Tagore's ideals of unity, justice, and enlightened education could guide India towards a more equitable and sustainable future. His holistic approach to nationalism as societal well-being is a blueprint for building a resilient nation.